Today we're answering another question from one of our listeners. She had messaged me and asked, what is the difference between an ETF and a mutual fund? So today we're going to be going over what is an individual stock, what is an ETF compared to that individual stock, and then finally what is a mutual fund compared to both of those other options. So stick with me. So when people say they own stock in a company, what they mean is they own shares of a corporation. They could own 1 share, 10 shares, 100 shares, 1,000 shares. However many shares they own is how many slivers of ownership they have in the overall company. This is a very simple example, but if you think about shares like a slice of a pizza, and instead of the slice of pizza, it's a slice or a slice of ownership of the overall company. If one person owns 1 share of a company, they own 1/8 of that company. Now, of course, this is overly simplified, and Apple, for example, has over 861 million shares. So to say this is an oversimplification is actually quite an understatement. So instead of 8 shares, there's over 800 million of them, but it's the same concept. If somebody went out and bought 100 million shares like Warren Buffett or a hedge fund of some kind, they would own 1/8 of that company. Next up, we have ETFs. So, exchange traded funds. ETFs trade like a stock, but they're actually a basket of several stocks, normally about 20 to 30 stocks, and they will track an index, whether it be the healthcare index or the energy index. There are S&P 500 ETFs. Normally, they follow one sector or one segment of the market, but they can also follow the overall market. In that case, the S&P 500 or the Dow or the NASDAQ. There's several ETFs out there. The most important thing to know about exchange-traded funds is that they're just stocks in a basket, kind of wrapped up into a fund, and an exchange-traded fund. They trade just like a stock, so you can buy and sell it all within 1 hour if you wanted to, unlike a mutual fund. So they're very liquid, and they normally track an index or a segment of the market. So to summarize, ETFs or exchange traded funds, they trade like a stock, and there's normally about 20 to 30 stocks within one ETF. It's important to know that ETFs are everywhere. They make ETFs for energy, they make ETFs for healthcare, they make ETFs for technology. I mean, any sector of the market you want to talk about, or any blend, any combination you could dream about, there's an ETF for that blend. There's thousands of these things out there, so picking the right one is hard to do. But if you look at the underlying holdings, you can normally pick the one that you like the most, or you think will perform the most over the next few weeks or few months or few years. So last one, mutual funds. What is a mutual fund compared to an individual stock, and then what is a mutual fund compared to an ETF? Well, an individual stock is one company. ETF is 20 to 30 companies all put in one basket. A mutual fund could be upwards of 150 to 200 different companies all collected together, and it's a style of active management because they have the mutual fund managers in there selecting different companies for you. So there's no management on an individual stock. There is no management on an ETF because it's just 20 or 30 stocks pulled together. Nobody's watching it. We utilize a lot of mutual funds in our client accounts because they are so widely diversified. We find that the more diversified you can be, the smoother the ride it'll give the client, minimizing any kind of individual stock volatility or volatility associated with only being invested in 2, 3, 5, 25 companies. When you can go out and buy 200 different companies, it gives you a much better representation of the overall market. You do have to pay a management fee to gain access to a lot of the mutual funds out there. Some have limits of $2,500, $5,000. Some you can't even get in unless you have $100,000. So an ETF or an individual stock is the cheaper way to go. You're not going to get active management with an ETF or just picking individual stocks. Mutual funds will give you active management. Okay, so I summarized it here. What you guys need to really take away is a stock or one share of a company is only one company. An ETF owns about 20, 30 companies within it, and a mutual fund will own probably over 200 different companies, give or take month to month, depending on their management style. So exposure-wise, when you own an individual stock, you're only exposed to one company. When you own an ETF, you're exposed much, much more. You're exposed 20 times more. And then when you own a mutual fund, the exposure level you have to the overall market is way, way greater than just buying one individual stock. So one more thing about the trading of individual stocks and ETF versus mutual funds. A stock and an ETF trade the same. You can go out and buy and sell these on the exchange all day long. You can buy them 1 minute, sell it the next. They're instantaneous as long as you're operating between the hours of 9:30 a.m. and 4 p.m. when the market is open. A mutual fund, you get today's closing price. So when you buy into a mutual fund, you get the 4 p.m. price or closing price of that mutual fund. And when you sell that mutual fund, you'll get that day's closing price. So when you buy in, you get 4 p.m.'s price, and when you sell, you get 4 p.m.'s price. So you cannot buy and sell these on the same day like you can a stock or an ETF. So thanks for joining me today, guys. That is it for episode number 9. I hope you learned a lot about the differences between an individual stock, an ETF, and a mutual fund. I hope to see you next time on episode number 10.